You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet ache, that strange invisible space between you and everyone else. Even when you're surrounded by people, there's a part of you that stays elsewhere, observing, floating just outside the noise. Not quite in it, not quite of it. It's not just introversion, it's not social discomfort, it's something older. You were born into a world that feels foreign. You tried to play the game, tried to wear the masks, but something inside you always whispered, "This isn't it." From a young age, you sensed the shadows behind the smiles. You noticed what others ignored, felt what others buried. You never asked to feel this much, but you couldn't shut it off. The weight, the depth, the strange sense that you were sent here for something more. But instead of clarity, you got silence. Instead of recognition, you got strange looks. And instead of belonging, you got distance. People say you're too much, too sensitive, too quiet, too intense. But what they don't see is what you're carrying. What they don't feel is the ancient remembering stirring in your chest. You see, there are souls who don't come here to fit in. They come here to remember, to see through illusion, to awaken something forgotten. But in a sleeping world, those who begin to wake up are called strange, or worse, broken. So you retreat, smile politely, shrink your voice, and slowly begin to doubt yourself. But that ache in your chest, that silent knowing, it's not a wound, it's a signal that you're not lost. You're being shaped, not by comfort, but by contrast. You were pulled away because your soul needed space to speak. You were made to feel different because your frequency is different. This is the curse of the chosen. To see deeply, but feel unseen. To carry light, but live in shadow. To be born for something sacred, and have no one to tell you what it is. But I will. In the next part, we'll begin to uncover why the chosen so often walk through darkness. Why the isolation, the heartbreak, the loss are not punishments, but preparations. Your pain has meaning. Let's step into it, together. There comes a time in every chosen soul's life when everything begins to fall apart. Not in chaos, not all at once, but silently, layer by layer, people drift away. The passions that once lit you up, suddenly they fade. The path you once walked, gone. The identity you clung to, dismantled. And worst of all, your connection to the divine goes quiet. As if the universe has turned its face from you. This is the wilderness, not a punishment, not abandonment, but the sacred middle space between who you were and who you are becoming. It's the space where the soul is stripped of illusion, where ego cannot follow, where only what's real survives. You question everything. Your mind fights it. Your body resists. You beg for clarity, but receive silence. Because this is not a place of answers, it's a place of undoing. Here, the false must fall. The attachments, the masks, the borrowed identities, they all burn. Not because you failed, but because you're finally ready to live without them. You cry in rooms alone, not because you're weak, but because your soul is in labor. You feel lost, but in truth, you're being realigned. You feel empty, but only because you're being hollowed for something greater to enter. This is the sacred fire, the place where all chosen must pass, because light isn't gifted, it's forged, and those who carry sacred frequencies must be emptied of what is not true. The isolation, it's part of the preparation. The silence, part of the recalibration. The falling away of what you once loved, part of the making of room for what you're now meant to carry. This is where you become undefinable, uncomfortable, uncontainable. Because the next version of you doesn't look like the old one, and to find it, you have to let go of who you thought you were. In the next part, we'll begin to explore what lies on the other side of this sacred collapse. The signs that your isolation is not the end, but the beginning of something extraordinary. The awakening, the return, the remembering. And then, somewhere in the quiet, something shifts. Not loudly, not with trumpets or fire, but in a whisper, a breath, a knowing that doesn't come from the mind, but from the deep beneath. You begin to feel it, that you were never meant to belong to a world built on pretending, that your discomfort wasn't dysfunction, it was sensitivity to distortion, that your breakdown wasn't the end, it was a breaking open, and you realize the isolation wasn't a curse, it was sacred space, a womb, a chrysalis, because what's awakening in you can't be born in noise. It needs silence, stillness, separation. You start noticing signs, not dramatic ones, but quiet confirmations. A word that hits different. A dream that feels more real than waking. A moment where the trees seem to breathe with you. A synchronicity so precise it sends shivers down your spine. And in those moments, you remember. Not with your brain, but with your bones. You were never crazy, never broken, never weak. You were just attuned to something deeper, something older, something that doesn't scream, but sings beneath the noise. The reason you felt out of place is because you were born to create a new place, to build, to heal, to anchor what others can't yet see. But first, you had to see it for yourself. You had to remember. And what you're beginning to remember now is not just who you are, but what you carry. The gift, the insight, the frequency, that ancient fire still burning beneath the layers. And now, finally, it begins to rise. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when the chosen one stops hiding, when the fire they tried to extinguish becomes the very light that others need to see. You've remembered. Now, you begin to emerge. There comes a moment when you no longer shrink, not because the world got easier, not because they finally understood you, but because you remembered who you are, not a role, not a label, not an identity you inherited, but the frequency beneath it all. And from that moment on, you walk differently. You speak with fewer words. You listen more deeply, because your presence carries what your explanations never could. This is not about becoming special. It's about becoming true. It's about letting the fire they tried to extinguish burn gently through your veins, not to destroy, but to warm, to guide, to ignite. You begin to realize this. Your softness is not weakness. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. Your intensity is not a mistake. You were just tuned to a different signal, and now you're learning how to live with it instead of against it. Not hiding, not proving, just being. And that being starts to change things. Not loudly, not theatrically, but people feel it. They pause when you speak. They sit longer in your silence. They ask questions they didn't plan to ask, because your presence creates permission. Permission to feel, to rest, to unmask. This is what the chosen ones were always meant to do. Not to stand on stages, not to save the world, but to be so deeply aligned with truth, with stillness, with presence, that the world shifts quietly around them. You're not here to convince. You're here to remember. You're not here to be approved. You're here to embody. And when you do, the curse becomes a calling. The isolation becomes illumination. The pain becomes the portal. In the next part, our final part, we'll bring it all together. Why you felt different. Why you were separated. Why the ache was necessary. And why the moment you stop hiding, you become exactly who you were always meant to be. You've walked through the silence. You've sat with the ache. You've broken and bled and questioned everything. And now, you begin to rise. But not as who you were. Not as the one who needed validation or understanding. You rise as the one who no longer needs to be seen to know who they are. Because now, you carry something different. A light not lit by the world, but by the wilderness you survived. a voice that doesn't echo others, but rings with soul memory, and a presence that doesn't seek control, but brings peace, simply by being. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You don't need to convince anyone. Because what you carry speaks louder in silence than most speak with words. This is what the isolation created. Not distance, but depth. Not separation, but sacred stillness. And now that you've learned to sit with yourself, you're ready. Not to be above others. Not to lead from ego, but to hold space for those who are now walking where you once did. Because here's the truth. The chosen aren't chosen for themselves. They're chosen because they can carry light where others have lost the way, not to preach, not to save, but simply to be, to walk into a room and shift the energy without a word, to live gently, and remind others what it means to feel. So if you've felt unseen, misunderstood, set apart from the world, it's because you were never meant to blend in. You were meant to stand still while the world spun around you, to remain grounded while everything else shook, to be the reminder that something deeper still exists. And now, you are not hiding. You are not shrinking. You are not waiting for someone to name your value. Because your presence, your softness, your depth is the gift, and someone, somewhere, is waiting for exactly that. So if this spoke to you, if this stirred something in you, it's not because of the words. It's because your soul remembers. And maybe this message was meant only for the ones who've walked through the fire and still chose to love, the ones like you.